Welcome to Alameda Backyard Growers. We're delighted to have Linda Carloni as our speaker this evening. Let me tell you a little bit about Linda. But first I want to say that if you have questions, please put your questions into the chat box and we'll get to them at the end of her presentation. She's got a lot of material, so hopefully she'll cover it ahead of time, and she'll also let you know about the fact that this will be available in a blog that she's written. So you don't necessarily need to take notes. There'll be lots of information that you can access after the meeting. So Linda, I'm very pleased and proud to introduce her to you if you don't already know her. She's an enthusiastic vegetable gardener in the city of Alameda, as well as a master gardener in Alameda County, and a member of Alameda Backyard Growers Board of Directors. She watches birds whenever she can and works to protect them, especially the new bald eagles that we have here in Alameda at Carica Golf Course. In a past life, she practiced law, mostly serving small technology companies. So I give you Linda about Perennial Vegetables.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you for that introduction. I am so happy to see all of you here to learn about one of my favorite subjects. I want to tell you that this presentation began as a blog post, which was part of the Alameda County Master Gardeners blog. So I want to thank and recognize Judy Kwan and Aaron Wright and all of my other blog buddies for all of their help and support for getting this project off the ground. The blog is posted on the Master Gardeners website, and I think that I think Sarah will put it in the chat. Okay, and now there we go. Sorry, I couldn't get it to move. Okay, what is a perennial vegetable? So when used with food plants, the definition I found says, perennial means that the plant lives from year to year and does not die after flowering once. Well, of course, most of the well-known perennial food plants are not vegetables. They're trees or bushes or vines, and they give fruit. But there are perennial vegetables, and they're two of the most common to us in California we're right there. We also can grow other perennials. We can successfully grow tree collards on the left here, rhubarb in the center, and sunchokes, which are pictured on the right. Also many more, some of which you'll meet tonight. Now, why should I grow perennial vegetables? Well, my first reason is that I love asparagus. Basically, asparagus is delicious and it's a perennial, and it probably is my very favorite vegetable. But in addition, if you don't love asparagus, perennials also do other things for you. They extend the season you can eat from your garden without having to do serious succession planting. Perennials tend not to be ready in the middle of the summer when you've got so many other annual vegetables. Asparagus and artichokes will come in the early spring. Rhubarb is actually pretty darned early for something you can eat, for something you can harvest for your dessert. Sunchokes are generally harvested in October, so they're the other end of the spectrum, much later than your summer crops. And they can also be stored in the soil, so you can be eating them in December. So, of course, here in the coastal East Bay, you can harvest greens all year round, but it's nice to have something to supplement those greens. In addition, it's believed that the perennials are more sustainable, at least most of them. The soil of perennials doesn't get disrupted every year, so the roots and frequently the leaves are present and they protect the soil for year-round. In addition, they tend to have a much bigger root mass than most annuals, and so they can dig down and reach water and nutrients which are further down in the soil. So typically they will require less irrigation and fewer supplemental nutrients than many annuals do. Of course, for every rule, there is an exception. And there are perennials like watercress and wasabi that you can grow here, but they both require a huge amount of water. And we're not going to talk about those tonight. Personally, I think that perennials are less work, but that doesn't mean no work. There's definitely an upfront investment, especially with asparagus, in terms of prepping the soil and planting. But nevertheless, with perennial vegetables, you plant once and you harvest over many years. You do have to do some annual maintenance, but I just don't think it's as much annual work as for planting annuals year round, as is planting annuals every year and then having to maintain them during their growing season. And they can be planted in the fall and the winter so that you have something to do in the winter, so long as the soil is not too wet. It also means that you don't have to do it in the summer when you're really busy with your annuals. But like everything, there are drawbacks. There are always drawbacks with everything. You need to plan really carefully. The biggest drawback of perennials, as far as I know, as far as I think, is that it limits your flexibility. The goal of planting perennial vegetables, of course, is for them to produce food for you and take up the same space in your garden for a long time. So you need to think really carefully in advance about where you want them. You need to be willing to dedicate that space to the perennial for many years in order to get the benefits of all that upfront work. With many perennial vegetables, you'll also need to wait longer than to get an edible crop. A lot of them just don't produce very much don't produce and shouldn't be cut in the first year. Finally, there can be pest problems. You can't use crop rotation to mitigate your pests when you've got perennials. So you may get more pests that you might have been able to avoid if you were rotating your crops. And since the roots are in the ground a long time, if you live in a gopher-prone area, they can attract root pests like gophers. But say you've decided that the benefits outweigh the drawbacks, and you're going to go ahead and plant perennial vegetables. So
you muted yourself.
how did I do that? When did I stop?
About 1 minute ago.
Okay, so these are the drawbacks. And here is artichokes. Perennial artichokes. I wonder how that happened. Anyway, perennial artichokes are particularly well suited to cool summer, mild winter areas like the coastal regions of Northern California. In fact, Monterey County produces more than half the artichokes commercially grown in California. They used to produce almost all of the artichokes, but varieties are now available that can be grown as annuals. In particular, a variety called Imperial Star. That allows artichokes to be grown in other places, such as Southern California. But tonight, we're going to talk mostly about growing artichokes as perennials. Artichokes are a big plant. They are 3 to 4 feet wide and high, so give them plenty of room. They also like at least 6 hours of sunlight, including at least some direct sun in the winter. Don't have to have 6 hours in the winter, but you need to have sun. Rootstock, they're planted from rootstock. It's best planted from October to December. You need to have soil that drains well and is well amended with compost before planting. You're going to hear that many times in this presentation. The soil, when you put in a perennial, needs to be well amended because it's going to be in that soil for a really long time. With artichokes, some soil release fertilizer at the time of planting is also a good idea, especially if you live in sand, such as most of the places in the city of Alameda. Water before planting, especially if you haven't gotten rain. The artichoke root sections should be set 6 to 8 inches deep in the soil and 3 to 4 feet apart. When the artichokes are actively growing, you probably want to give them a little nitrogen fertilizer. In the summer, when it gets warm, really hot, they'll go dormant, and you don't have to irrigate the plant when it's dormant. Otherwise, they need water. After the last bud in a stalk, after the last bud on a plant is harvested and bloomed, You need to cut, I'm sorry, I'm confused. After the last bud on a stalk is harvested or has bloomed, you want to cut the stalk down to just below the ground at an angle. Buds are generally ready to harvest in late winter, early spring, but don't harvest until their second year. This is also going to sound familiar. In terms of harvesting, if you can harvest, of course, after that, and when you do harvest, you need to be careful that if you let a bud flower, it's going to inhibit the rest of the plant from creating more buds. So you don't want to have those beautiful flowers come until you're done. You've gotten all the artichokes that you want. In terms of pests, artichokes can be very prone to aphids. You want to monitor them frequently and early and wash off the buds and leaves to get rid of the aphids quickly. Do it just with a strong stream of water. The aphids get hard to control once they get under the bud scales. And as I mentioned before, gophers can be a problem. And now we get to move on to my favorite, asparagus, which grows well in cool, humid summers. And so like the artichoke, it really thrives in the more coastal regions of Alameda County. Asparagus also takes a lot of room. However, each plant only needs a little bit of room, say 1.5 feet by 1.5 feet. But the problem is that each plant doesn't make many stalks. So if you plant the recommended 5 to 20 plants per asparagus eater, you're going to need a lot of space. I don't have enough space for 20 plants for asparagus eater. In Alameda County, asparagus is typically grown from crowns. It's planted from January through March. The crowns are what they are is 1-year-old roots. Seeds, you could grow from seeds, and they're certainly much less expensive, but the seeds can be tricky to get established. Crowns you can find pretty widely. Should you be lucky enough to find a variety that is resistant to fusarium and rust, I would recommend getting those. You need to prepare the soil carefully. Asparagus is probably the pickiest plant I know in terms of how you plant it. So first you wait until the soil is dry enough to work. Then you dig a trench, say 1 foot or so deep and 1 foot wide. Then you make small mounds every 18 inches or so to create raised places for the crowns to sit on. Then you put down some compost and keep the height elevation of the mounds, just, put an even layer on. This is the point where you might add some slow release fertilizer if your soil is sandy and drains of nutrients quickly. Then you put down a little bit more soil. And your objective here is that you want the tops of the mounds that you're going to put the crowns on. You want the tops of those mounds to be around 6 inches below the soil surface at this point. So you can adjust things to make sure that happens. Then you put the crown on the mound and you put soil all over the trench so that the trench is even at about 4 inches below the soil surface. So now you've got an even trench 4 inches down from the surrounding soil. So then you start to check the plants every so often, and you fill in the trench evenly, gradually as the plants sprout and grow bigger. Should you be listening from a place other than Alameda, and you have heavy clay soil or another soil that just for some reason just stays wet, you shouldn't use this technique, but you can find a link to another technique which will work for heavy soils in the blog post. Keep the soil moist, keep the bed free of weeds the whole first year. Once the plants have come up well, you can mulch, and that helps keep the weeds down. When you come into your next spring, you've planted it in one winter, you've gone a whole year around, and you want to apply a high nitrogen fertilizer before the plants start to produce that season and each other season. So now here's where the real patients come in. You can't harvest the first 2 springs. You need to let the plants leave out and become ferny. The 3rd spring after you've planted, you can start to harvest, but you can only harvest for 2 or 3 weeks. Then let them go back to, then stop harvesting and let those spears turn into ferny growth. The second year that you can harvest for 6 to 8 weeks. And in later years, you can harvest for 2 whole months or until the largest spears become thinner than a pencil. In any event, when you've stopped harvesting as directed, you let it all fern out and let it be until the next winter comes along, until the next spring comes along, putting nitrogen on the soil before their spring growth starts. I lost my
Linda?
slide.
That's okay, Miss Linda.
There we go. All right, so we did our careful soil preparation and we waited 2 years. The only thing else I have to say about asparagus is that with luck, your asparagus plants will produce harvest for 15 years in the same spot with relatively little care. Sarah has a whole bunch of asparagus in the farm that she works at, and I believe it's been there for a while.
That's right. Linda, can you speak to transplanting or moving asparagus? Should you be moving locations?
Well, I tried that. It was not a success.
Okay.
Someone else might be able to do it, but I couldn't. I killed them all. I never got the ones that I moved because I had planted them where the raspberries decided they were going to grow. So when I tried to move them, they died. So I don't know whether that's my problem or whether that's generally a problem with asparagus. I haven't looked that up.
Yeah, Irene is saying she did it successfully.
Good
So
for her.
Yeah, that's great news. Can
That's
you also,
awesome.
right? Can you also speak to growing asparagus in raised beds?
I don't know. Well, I have to say, I also tried that and it didn't work, but I think that was operator error. I think that it's tricky to get the raised beds it was tricky for me in my raised beds to get a trench that was deep enough, but I don't know why you couldn't do it. I just failed because I think I didn't do it right.
That's fair. Thank
Other
you.
questions?
Nope.
No,
those,
okay.
Those are them.
I'm very excited that someone moved their asparagus and they didn't kill it. Bunching onions. So you may know that green onions sold in the supermarket are immature bulbing onions. This species is called Allium cepa, and it becomes a green onion when it's planted very thickly and then harvested before much of a bulb can form. So it's an annual. But a related species, Allium fistulosum, which is called bunching or Welsh onions, they're a perennial, and they have nothing to do with Wales. You can grow these from seeds or from plants, seedlings. Seeds can be planted out, I'd say from spring through early fall. I found some seedlings in the early fall. Somebody had planted the seeds for me and popped them in. And I don't know, I'm not touching this. It just does it. This is very strange. Okay, bunching onions. I'm not even gonna, mature clumps, when the clump gets mature, it needs to be separated by 6 to 8 inches from any other clump or from other plants. But you can start them much more closely and then separate them by pulling the stuff out, pulling green onions out until you get clumps in the spaces or at the spacing you need. Especially when the bunching onions are small, you need to weed often. Mulch will keep the weeds down and keep the moisture in because it needs to stay moist but not wet. If the plant sends up flowering stalks, you want to cut them off before they bloom so that the plant puts its energy into multiplying rather than blooming. You'll hear that again too. In the winter, the plant is likely to be dormant and not productive. To say mine still are alive, but they don't look great right now. It's been too cold. But in the spring, as long as the greens are at least 1/4 to 1/2 an inch in diameter, you can harvest them whenever you need some onion flavor. At the first, you might want to just cut off the tops and leave the bulbs. But once the clump gets a little bigger, you can actually remove the onions one at a time from the edge of the bunch. This can be kind of a pain. You may have to use a trowel to remove the soil next to the clump. And always be sure to leave some vigorous greens and bulbs undisturbed so that the plant will continue and multiply. If the clump becomes bigger than you want, dig it up in the fall, divide the clump and replant it. Sadly, bunching onions are susceptible to the same diseases as bulbing onions. So horseradish. But the spinach wants to talk. Here, horseradish. So with horseradish, we eat the taproot, which develops in cold weather. So many people say that the best tasting horseradish roots, by which they mean the sharpest tasting horseradish roots, need to have gone through several frosts to develop that flavor. So in the Alameda and the other parts of the coastal Bay Area, you may not get horseradish with as sharp a taste. Like most, but if you're out in the valley and out in the Tri-Valley, you might do better because you're going to have some frost that they've gone through. Again, like most of the perennials discussed here, horseradish requires well-amended and fertile soil. It's planted generally from root cuttings and in February. The cuttings are cut flat on the top and at an angle on the bottom. So when you put them in, you want to set them, this is really interesting, at a 45-degree angle in the soil. I don't know why. The top about 3 inches deep, and the roots should be set at least 15 inches apart. So you need to irrigate the horseradish in the dry seasons. Horseradish, interestingly, requires a lot of potassium. So while the Bay Area generally has soil with plenty of potassium, you may need it here, especially where the soil is sandy and loses nutrients quickly. You can add potassium through kelp meal and other fertilizers. You need to be careful not to add too much nitrogen because that'll encourage leafy growth rather than root growth, which is what you want. In terms of harvesting, I think you want to harvest in November, or at least try harvesting a little bit in November if it's been cool. If it's not sharp enough for you, then wait a little while until you've had more cold weather. I think this winter in the Bay Area would have been great. If you want the horseradish to be a perennial, leave some roots in the soil and you will get horseradish the next year. Even if you don't want it to be a perennial, it may be a perennial. It's somewhat invasive. New Zealand spinach. Now this is something that both Allison and I have grown a lot. New Zealand spinach is not a true spinach, but it does taste kind of like it. It is kind of a wonder plant in terms of vitamins. It is said to be one of the plants that saved Captain Cook and his crew from scurvy. It is frost sensitive, so it might be hard to grow out beyond the East Bay Hills, but it grows well in places like Alameda. Tolerates warm weather much better than real spinach. This plant prefers fertile soil, but it isn't as picky as some of the other perennials. So if you don't have the best soil, it'll probably do okay anyway. If you're going to do it from seeds, it's recommended that you soak the seeds in water for about 24 hours before planting in order to improve and speed up germination. Seeds should be sown, let's see, 1 inch deep and also be planted directly outside in early spring. Actually, that's 1/2 inch deep. Sorry, I got that wrong. Seeds can also be started inside and transplanted when they reach 1 to 2 inches. These seeds are a little tricky to germinate, like carrot seeds. They take 2 or 3 weeks to emerge, and they do not emerge uniformly. which is a reason to start them indoors where you can keep more of an eye on them. Once you've got them, once they've come up and you've got them out there, make sure they're about 12 inches apart to grow and get big. Weeds are the biggest issue with New Zealand spinach, the biggest pest, especially when the plants are young. Mulches help suppress the weeds, as with all plants. Once the plant starts to spread and fill in, it can choke out most of the weeds on its own, but it'll need weeding help when it's little. New Zealand spinach likes a little bit of supplemental nitrogen. It's producing all those leaves you're eating. Once established, you can really cut back the irrigation, but it'll taste better if you leave it with some irrigation. New Zealand spinach grows through runners. Once the plant has reached a spread of 1 foot or so, you want to harvest the 2 or 3 inches at the end of the branches. So if you look at the picture, that's kind of the end you're going to harvest. It is tips and leaves and kind of the tender shoots. You want to harvest frequently because that'll encourage the new growth, which tastes the best. Once the plant has bloomed and gotten those little knobby seed pods, the taste and texture definitely diminish. In late summer, you want to cut it back to 1 foot to encourage new growth. With respect to pests, we have good news here. New Zealand spinach has good disease and insect resistance where we are. Even leaf miners rarely attack New Zealand spinach. I would never say never, but rarely. Note that New Zealand spinach, like regular spinach, contains oxalic acid, and some people avoids oxalic acid for reasons that medical and other reasons. This rhubarb is another one of my favorites. So rhubarb originated in Central Asia and came to the West with Marco Polo. It is said to have been brought to North America by Benjamin Franklin. Personally, I grew up with rhubarb in the backyard, but it took a trip to Iceland to give me real appreciation for rhubarb. Rhubarb is really popular in Iceland, and one of the best ways to use it is the very common there and delicious happy marriage cake. There is a link to an Icelandic recipe for happy marriage cake in the blog. Another caution, rhubarb leaves and roots are poisonous. Probably everybody knows that, but they're poisonous because they have too much oxalic acid. So you should be careful to only use the stalks. So rhubarb does well when the average summer temperature is less than 75 degrees. The coastal parts of Alameda County have that, maybe not so much out in past the East Bay Hills. But it also prefers climates with colder winters than those at the coast, like Iceland. But it will produce here with a low chill variety, such as red cherry or giant cherry. The stalks won't be as thick as in cold winter climates. The stalks may not have that deep red color, but the lack of color does not affect the flavor. Like many of our perennials, rhubarb is a big plant. Clumps can grow to 2 feet high and wide. You should plant them in, you could say this, well-amended, fast-draining soil. You should plant them in winter from December to March. And generally they're planted from divisions, root divisions from a mother plant. I found my rhubarb starts in a nursery potted up. That was convenient. If you have unpotted roots, you want to bury them so that you want to plant them so that the crown bud is 2 inches below the soil surface. But if you get a potted up version, you put it at the same level as it has been growing. You space the roots 24 to 36 inches apart, and rhubarb will do fine with some shade and in the cooler parts of your garden. In the late fall or early winter, you want to fertilize it with a balanced fertilizer and spread out a few inches of compost over the root area. Make sure you keep the weeds out. You can probably do that with a layer of roots. The plants grow vigorously from early winter to early winter into early summer, and then they become dormant and can disappear. I thought I had killed my rhubarb because it disappeared, but it came back. It was a nice surprise in the spring. This is another plant that requires patience. Rhubarb should not be harvested in the first year. You need to let the plant grow and nourish the roots. In the second year, if the plant is doing well, you can pull stalks from the crown, but only for one light picking. After that, in the second year, and the next year after that, you can, as long as the plant is doing well, you can harvest for about 2 months by pulling and or twisting, but not cutting the stems. Cutting the stems will tend to leave a stump that may rot. Waiting really does matter. I know this from personal experience when I ruined my rhubarb by picking it too soon. It never really came back. When the rhubarb plant isn't getting enough nutrition, the rhubarb starts to shoot up. Yes, big stalks of white flowers. Cut them off, and in the fall, you may want to then divide the plant, making sure to keep 3 to 5 buds in each crown. Rhubarb is generally resistant to pests in our area.
Linda, before you move on,
Mhm.
sorry, can you, or do you know if the reason, I've noticed this at the farm too, but Birgit also had this question, is the lack of chill hours the reason why rhubarb here in Alameda doesn't really turn red?
Yes, that is correct.
No.
Even though they're called giant cherry, it's
Yeah.
not very cherry. It's very green,
Right.
but it tastes okay. Tastes
It
like
does
rhubarb.
taste great. Yeah, it does. It just doesn't look like it does in the pictures.
Not at all. Not
That's
at
right.
all.
That's right.
So you just have to bake it in something.
That's right.
Should we go into sunchokes?
Sure.
Sunchoke, as you probably know, is the most recent name for Jerusalem artichokes, which have no particular connection to Jerusalem or artichokes. The sunchoke name is much more apt because these plants really like a sunny place to grow, and they're in the same genus as the sunflower. They are native to some parts of North America. The Native Americans introduced European settlers to this tuber. It's very easy to grow. Its taste is kind of like between an artichoke and a water chestnut. It's pretty mild. You want to plant sunchokes in March or April from the tubers. You can buy tubers, or you can plant tubers from the grocery store. As long as nobody cut the buds off, you still need to have their buds. You might be able to cut a large tuber in half, but the pieces need to be pretty big, and they need to at least have 2 buds. Sunchokes are very productive. They are. So you might want to start by planting like 2 tubers per eater until you know how much you like them. They also can be invasive. So I put my sunchokes in a container. Any piece of tuber, if any piece of tuber stays in the soil, you will have sunchokes the next year. Planting them in containers keeps them kind of in their place. These are really, really tall plants. So if you put them in containers, you need to put the container needs to be at least 5 gallons. And you want to think about sinking the container, maybe 1/3 of its height down into the ground, so that the tall plants have a really good base and don't knock over the container when they get so tall. They need water in the summer. You saw in one of the first slides the small, beautiful yellow flowers that they get sometimes. They're pretty, but they are not needed for the roots to form and taste good. So in terms of harvest, when the leaves begin to turn brown, say in October, you can start to dig the tubers, but unless you're ready to eat them, they store best underground. It's recommended that you leave some stems in place so that you can find the tubers once most of the plant has gone away. if your container gets too crowded some year, pull on out the roots left, say go to wait till March and kind of dump out the container or dig it, get all the roots, and then choose just a few unblemished tubers and put them back in and amend the soil. Sunchokes are quite pest-free in Alameda County. And some people, maybe because they're native, I actually don't know if they're native to Alameda County. People sometimes find sunchokes hard to digest. They have a chemical called inulin, and it can be hard for some people's digestive system. So it's always good to start slow with sunchokes. And now we have come to our last in the alphabet. So all collard greens, the tree collard, all collard greens produce a lot of food and a lot of nutrition for the space they take up. Tree collards are a perennial form that if you stake it will grow like a tree, and it can be harvested most of the year. Two varieties of tree collards have local associations. The merit hybrid tree collards were developed by Merritt College in Oakland, and purple tree collards have been declared the official green of the city of Richmond. So it's a Bay Area plant. The best way to grow the plant is from cuttings, and those can be hard to locate, although you can find them online. And sometimes you can find them in specialty nurseries. You want to plant in an area with 4 to 5 hours of sun, so it can go in not the sunniest place in your yard, and in fertile soil, well drained. People usually plant collards in February. If you have unrooted cuttings, you want to make just a fresh slanted cut at the bottom of the offering, at the bottom of the cutting, and place it in several inches of soil. You may want to put it in a container with good quality potting soil, so you can keep an eye on it for a while, but you can also plant them directly into the ground. You want to water evenly, especially when the plant is young, and you're going to need to stake it. You can harvest after the plant has become has had time to become well established. After that, you can harvest whenever it isn't going to seed. But the leaves are sweeter in the cool weather, and the young leaves are the sweetest and most tender of all. Unfortunately, all collards are subject to the same pests as other brassicas, which includes my nemesis, the cabbage moth. So that can be another reason to plant them, to start them inside where you can control what's eating them. The cabbage pests are much more active in the warm weather than in the cool weather. So I just want to say one more thing. Welcome to the world of perennial vegetables. I hope you found something in the perennial vegetables that you'd like to eat and plant. These are the resources that I have for you. I would like to put, and a link to the blog as well, which I think Sarah's putting them all in the chat if they're not already there. I particularly want to make a shout out to the Pam Pierce book. It is an amazing source of information on vegetable gardening in the Bay Area, and has a lot of information about perennial vegetables. So thank you for coming. And I will stop sharing my slides. And Sarah, if we have any questions, you can ask me.
Awesome.
Whoa.
Thanks so much. We do have some questions, and also some really lovely suggestions. So Anthony mentioned for sunchokes to cut the bottom of a 5-gallon bucket and sink the bucket into the ground and plant tubers in the bucket. If not, you will have a wall of sunchokes.
Yes.
and that's true. We grow them at the farm, and they have a whole life of their own that I honestly cannot control. But they're wonderful. I actually really like sunchokes. So that's kind of an easy perennial to experience if perhaps you don't have room for asparagus or rhubarb in your life. we almost all have some space. If you're a gardener in Alameda, you probably have enough space for some sunchokes.
Yeah.
Deidre wanted to know if you had any advice on how to divide rhubarb, and I'll be honest, I'd like to hear this too. She's heard that you have to do it when it's dormant, but hers are not going dormant in her yard, which I find fascinating. By the way.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's not my experience.
Mine went so dormant that it disappeared.
That's right. That's right.
So I guess what I would do is wait until it's, I would do it. If yours aren't going dormant at all, I think I'd still wait till the end of the summer. But maybe August, and break it apart then. But I don't have any, that just makes sense to me because it's probably not going to be growing then. It's kind of like done for the year, done with the rhubarb for the year, unless yours produces all the time. You want to try to get it as close to dormant as you can, right? And if yours isn't going to go dormant, you know, I guess you just have to get it as close to dormant as you can.
Great. Donna had a question about how long New Zealand spinach lives for. Do you have any understanding? My understanding is that once you have it, you can almost never get rid of it. What's your experience?
My experience is that it lasts a really long time unless you don't clip it all the time. If you don't clip it all the time, it'll get rangy and just kind of weird.
Yeah.
So you need to be harvesting it pretty often, I think. Is that your experience, Sarah?
So full disclosure, this is not my favorite thing to grow. It's not my favorite thing to eat is what it is. And so I don't bother growing it because I like to grow what I like to eat. So it's not my favorite thing to eat. I have seen it absolutely take over raised beds in the most beautiful way. It almost becomes this like lovely ground cover. And that is worthwhile in my opinion, especially because it really mitigates weed growth by just shading out weeds. But yeah, I didn't experience it kind of dying off very often. And maybe it was because it just got clipped enough.
You know, we never had ours die. They just get big and don't taste very good anymore.
That's right. That's right.
Allison also grew the New Zealand spinach if she has anything to add.
Yeah.
I would just to repeat what you said. I did like to eat it, and I felt as long as you kept it cut shorter so that it wasn't growing all over your space, that was probably better.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that it was as vigorous as it was, and years. So I thought that was a real plus. My experience, even with pots on my balcony, was that somehow the seeds would spread from one pot to another. So there might be others growing in other pots, which was interesting. And that didn't bother me, but I thought it was pretty fascinating that it will continue to grow that way as well.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, that is. Birgit had a question about onions. I saw it and then I made it go away. Here it is. She bought parade green onions, and I think the label talks about them becoming bunching onions, but they don't seem to be bunching. She's wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
I guess my question is, when did you put them in?
Birgit, you're welcome to unmute and talk about it if you'd like.
I just need to find myself. Sorry.
Oh, there you go. When did you put in the bunching onions?
I lost myself. You know, I've grown them a couple of crops, and probably they've had them in, I don't know, 5-6 months or so.
And they just don't get big and bunch.
They just don't seem to bunch. So I'm wondering if maybe they're just not the same species.
Well, they might not have
That's what
been.
you're talking about.
When I bought it, it was labeled Allium fistulosum.
Okay.
I knew it was. So it's possible somebody would, you know, they were selling it. They were just selling you an annual onion that makes really good green onions.
Yeah, I'll go back and look at the package and see.
I don't know. Otherwise, I don't know. I'm
Mhm.
pretty new to bunching onions. Mine still look terrible from the winter, so.
Everything looks terrible this year, except the brassicas, which are really happy.
Yes, they're very happy. Valerie's wondering if you can, if, or perhaps anyone here can talk to how to divide chives.
I'm really sorry, Valerie. I have no idea, but I hope somebody does. I have no idea. I decided not to write about, not to talk about, not to write about herbs because it's such a big topic.
Yeah.
okay?
Valerie, I have divided chives literally. So we grew a lot of chives when I lived in Chicago, which of course has a really harsh winter. And we had them in pots. And we would kind of be mean to them in a lot of ways. At the end of the season, if I was being a good gardener that year, I would cut them into fourths, like take the pot and cut the chive bundle into fourths and put them into 4 different pots, and then store them in the garage, which was not heated, so cold, but not ice cold. And we weren't very delicate with that at all. We literally just cut the root bunch into quarters, and they spread like wildfires. It was kind of wonderful. So
Awesome.
try it, maybe. Also, Google is a wonderful thing. That could be a great thing.
Oh,
to
and,
look up.
and if you get Pam Pierce's book, I'm sure she says, I would suspect that she says something about it.
That's true.
And you really can find it in, I think, most libraries.
That's right. Linda, Kathy had a question about, well, she has tree collards that look like a palm tree, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And she's wondering how I'm going to translate this a little bit into how you propagate it.
So you take, yeah, I think you can just take a cutting. So just get a good looking branch. I've seen people do this. It's just kind of a miracle. You get a good looking branch and you cut it down a little ways from the leaf and you stick it in a pot.
Yeah. Do you add
I've did
any?
a few of them. I have not done this myself. I don't grow collards. I don't like collards.
It's okay.
Can I say something about it?
Oh, thank you,
Yeah,
Dana.
of course.
Yes. It doesn't have branches, just leaves that are beautiful purpley green leaves that come
So you've
out.
got the purple one, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
does the leaf have a stalk?
It's just one tall trunk.
How
or
new?
stalk, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. How new is this planting?
3 years ago.
Oh,
Hmm.
that's
So
some.
is there any kind of like little stem that the leaf comes off of? Or does it just grow out of the stalk?
A tiny little, yeah, there's a tiny little stem, I suppose. I was given this piece, it was a cutting. And I just stuck it in the ground and it just grew straight up. It never grew branches, which is the
That's
oddest.
amazing.
Yeah, so it's a spin, it's,
It's spindly, yeah.
1/4 of an inch diameter, but 6 feet tall. And I have to support it with guy wires. Keep it.
That's hilarious.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it will work, but I would recommend taking off the leaf with the little leaf stem.
Yeah.
And, kind of as close to the trunk as you can get without damaging the trunk, and stick it in a bunch of potting soil. And I'd keep it inside for a while to make sure that the slugs, things don't get at it. And see if it works, right? You don't have anything to lose.
Okay,
Right.
I like your optimism.
Yeah.
So you would put it in soil rather than water to root it.
I've never heard of you rooting them in water, so I would definitely try soil.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Sure.
Linda, this is Irene, if I could chime
Hi,
in.
honey.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great.
Because I have a tree collard and
Oh, good. Maybe you know.
they're kind of indestructible. So, what I would suggest is to cut the top off.
Oh my God.
And then
Once
you
you get it to branch.
that'll get it to branch underneath. And then you have that little top section that you cut off and that'll root. My experience is these things root like crazy. You don't need hormone, you don't need anything. You just stick them in some potting soil and it'll root. It'll probably take maybe a month or two to root. Don't keep tugging at it, otherwise it won't
Yeah, yeah,
work.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Just stick it in the potting soil. It should work fine and it should sprout out. And I have some cuttings. So whoever it was that asked this question, if by taking my suggestion, you kill your collard, get a hold of Linda and I'll give her one of mine. As a guarantee.
Awesome.
Can I just add something real fast?
Yeah.
This is Allison. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
My experience has been it's better to use a tender stalk rather than a woody one of the collard, tree collard. If you're gonna cut one off and root it yourself, find something that's younger and tender, not one of those woody branches. That's all I wanted to say about that.
Thanks.
good.
That's right. Thanks, Allison.
You bet.
That's great.
Excellent. Good information, all of you. Because I don't know, I don't grow tree collards because I don't like them. I don't like to eat them. So,
Fair. So I think we've covered all the questions that pertain to your to your presentation, but we have one that's slightly off topic, but I think it would be, I think this person would welcome any advice. So Jackie, congratulations, has just purchased her first home here in Alameda after being here for 25 years and renting. And she wants to create a permaculture garden in her sunny and grassy area. She wants to sheet mulch, but she's wondering if any of us have suggestions on how long she should leave that mulch in place before the soil will be ready for perennial vegetables.
well, I'm curious as to what other people think. It kind of depends on how bad your weed problem is.
Right.
Because if you have a lot of really persistent weeds like Bermuda grass, you probably want to let it go longer. I always let it go through, when I've sheet mulched, I've always let it go through a winter. I sheet mulch in the summer or the fall and I let it go through the winter. But people say you can do it much sooner than that. I've just never done that. But I would really welcome that's just how I've sheet mulched. I do it in the fall, in the late summer and the fall, and I put it all down and I let it get rained on, and then I plant in the next spring. But Birgit has a better idea.
She does. Tell us.
Tell us.
My thought on it is, I have got, you need to know what your soil actually looks like. So you are going to want to dig at least some parts of it so that you know what's actually under there. I have two neighbors who have two big trees. One of them is a black walnut and one of them is a redwood. And neither of them actually water their trees. So I water their trees for them. And I went to dig to plant some potatoes about 2 months ago. And I was pulling probably I would say about 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds for every 1 foot square of soil that I was digging of roots out of it. I mean, it was a complete knot. So if you happen to have trees, if you have even a long ways away, if your neighbor's trees are in your soil, you can sheet mulch over the top of it, but you're never going to know what's underneath there, and you could potentially have a really big problem. So I would say at least try some pilot test holes before you just sheet mulch over the top of it. And you might even want to use one of those, a broad fork, and actually get a little bit of compost sort of worked in and also loosen up the soil a bit before you do the sheet mulching. I would say, just sheet mulching over the top isn't necessarily going to add anything to the rest of your soil. So that's my thought.
Thank you. That's great. There's actually a massive redwood in our neighbor's yard, like huge. So
Yeah.
I'm really glad to hear this from you.
Yeah, so you want to know whether or not the roots are coming into your yard.
Okay.
If they are, you may have difficulty with the whole permaculture concept. Because this place where I dug out, I probably a year ago dug out exactly the same number of roots from that spot.
Wow.
Unless I go and just put metal down along the side of my yard, you know, that edges onto the neighbors and just put like a big barrier, I'm probably forever going to get roots there. And I love the tree. I love the redwood. So, you know, I live with it.
Right. I
Thank
would also add that, like, just because you have the redwood and there may be root issues and underground things that need to kind of be accommodated, you can still grow in that area. You are not lost in the world of not being able to live out your dream of permaculture. I think you may need to adapt and pivot in some ways, but I think things can absolutely still happen.
Great.
Well, I would say that too. I mean, I'm sure that it all depends on your circumstances, but I have a very large oak tree in my backyard, which is not a terribly invasive plant. But it has, I have roots all in every part of my yard.
That's right.
And if I didn't grow where the roots are, I would not grow anything.
That's right.
So you kind of, I mean, I clear them when I need to. I cut off the roots and hope it doesn't matter. You know, the tree is 200 years old. It probably doesn't matter. But it is not the end of, it can be managed, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah.
Great.
And if you're looking for sheet mulching help, Stop Waste has really great resources online around sheet mulching. And one of the folks that work there, Lori Caldwell, her Instagram handle is Compost Girl, and she is a very experienced sheet mulcher and would probably offer up some advice. I'm saying these things for her, so I make no promises, but she's wonderful, and that's like part of her side hustle. So
Awesome.
And the resources on that website, you're right. They're the best I have found, Sarah.
that's right. They really are.
Thank you so much. Very
You're
helpful.
welcome. You're welcome.
All right.
Folks, I have dropped in all the links. I realize I did it kind of slowly. Sorry about that. But they are all in the chat from Linda's presentation. So feel free to dig a little bit to be able to click on those. But that ends our questions for the evening.
Allison is going to take us out. She has a few things I think to say.
Awesome.
just want to, first of all, say thank you to Sarah for helping us with the chat and everything else. And to actually give a plug for Sarah, because when you talk about the farm, you're talking about farm to market, which is community supported agriculture at Alameda Point Collaborative. And if you don't know about it, it's a wonderful resource. It's a wonderful source for vegetables and fruit year round, and it's member supported. And I couldn't say enough good things about it, from a place to volunteer as well as to purchase fruits and vegetables. So if you haven't ever heard of it and visited it, please make a point of going out there. It's, as I say, a wonderful resource. Linda, as always, remarkable job. Thank you. You packed so much information into a very short talk, I think, and we're very grateful for that. This presentation will be available to view on our website, the Alameda Backyard Growers website, in a week or so. Please feel free to go check it out. All of this information that Linda provided is in a blog that she mentioned earlier. We've given you a link to that as well. And if you forget where it is, go to the Alameda County Master Gardeners website and look for the Perennial Vegetables mention, and you will find it there. And anything else that I've left out, either Sarah or Linda?
Oh, the only other thing I would say is that I just want to put a plug in for the Alameda County Master Gardeners Help Desk. You can just go to the Alameda County Master Gardeners website, and you can either send an email or you can send do it through a survey, and a survey form which is on the web, and we will work very hard to get you a good answer to your question.
I think the only other thing I would plug is, what is our next educational endeavor?
Yes, okay, two things. Fiona Lundby wanted to know what Alameda Point Collaborative and the CSA is. Can you talk about that first, and then I'll say what's
Oh,
coming? in
sure.
March.
So I work for Farm to Market, which is a social enterprise of Alameda Point Collaborative, and we have a CSA that'll start in April. I'll put the link in here after I'm done talking, because I can't seem to talk and type. We do 3 seasons a year, so a spring season, a summer season, and a fall season, and it rolls. This year we're changing dates a little bit, but it should start at the first Friday of April and end in December. That's the full season. And we give out a little bit of everything, from annuals to lots of perennials. We grow on about 2 acres, and
There's asparagus.
we have some of the best asparagus, actually. It kind of changes what you think about asparagus, actually. But it's about 2 acres. And if you don't know what Alameda Point Collaborative is, we are down by the old Navy base. And when the Navy base was decommissioned in 97, the nonprofit I work for took it over, and they've repurposed all of the barracks housing, all the family housing, into housing for folks that had been previously unhoused. And so we have somewhere between, one side or the other, about 600 residents on that land, and about 200 dwellings, because many folks are families, right? So it's multi-generational, as well as just, folks have kids. I have one in the shower right now. So we're doing a lot. We're doing on-the-job training. We're doing food reclamation work. There's a bunch of stuff going on, but if anybody wants to volunteer, we always accept volunteers. And you're welcome to sign up for the CSA. And I swear I will put it in the chat in just a second.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Of course.
I will say next month, March 12th, we're having a special program at a bonsai garden. And there will be a chance to learn about how to grow bonsais. Please check our website for that, Alameda Backyard Growers website. It is a rain check event that had to be canceled due to rain once already. And so we are giving the people who signed up and registered for it originally the chance to re-sign up for that. If we do not fill it, we will make that information available so other people can sign up for as well on March 12th. We're excited to be offering that. In April, we'll be having a plant sale that's part of a spring fling that's being offered by Alameda Parks and Recreation. And in May, Birgit Evans is going to do a workshop for us in person about how to start native pollinator plants. So we're excited about that, and that's what we've got planned so far. So we hope you can join us for any and all of those upcoming programs and events. We have a wonderful newsletter, we have a wonderful website, and we do our best to educate you every month in a variety of ways, including articles in the Alameda Sun as well. So thank you all for joining us tonight. As I said, this presentation will be available on our website. We're so glad you joined us. You have wonderful questions, and join us again in the future as well. Anything else?
Not for me. Thank you all.
Thank you. Wonderful job. Thank you all.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.